Siya Ram, Jai 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 Siya Ram. सियावर रामचंद्र की, सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की। कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण लावले, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, अच्युतानंद गोविंद माधवा, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, सच्चिदानंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण कृष्ण मुकुंदा जनार्दना, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, 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 गोविंद नारायण हरे, कृष्ण गोविंद नारायण हरे, गोविंद नारायण हरे। श्री कृष्णचंद्र भगवान की जय।
Hari Om everyone. Can you all see me and hear me clearly? Last week we did not have the class, but I think this week and maybe few more weeks and we should be able to complete this ātmabodha, and then we will think about what to do next and how to do it. Hope and pray that all of you are doing well, and with the Thanksgiving week coming around, hope you are having an amazing time with your family and friends. We'll begin with the invocation Hari will do the 3 shlokas, the invocation and the 2 shlokas. If I'm not wrong, it is 61st and 62nd. So we will do that. He will lead and I'll repeat. And then Divya will give her explanation, then Hari will give her his explanation, then I will try to wind it up. Let's begin with the invocation. ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्तिः 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 गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुरेव परं ब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः.
Hari Om, the invocation.
1 second. Yes, please.
तपोभिक्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणां मुमुक्षूणामपेक्ष्योऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते. 61. यद्भासा भास्यते'rkādi
यद्भासा भास्यते'rkādi
bhāsyairyattu न भास्यते.
bhāsyairyattu न भास्यते.
येन सर्वमिदं भाति
येन सर्वमिदं भाति
तद्ब्रह्मेत्यवधारयेत्.
तद्ब्रह्मेत्यवधारयेत्.
स्वयमन्तर्बहिर्व्याप्य
स्वयमन्तर्बहिर्व्याप्य
भासयन्नखिलं जगत्.
भासयन्नखिलं जगत्.
ब्रह्म प्रकाशते वह्निप्रतप्तायसपिण्डवत्.
ब्रह्म प्रकाशते वह्नि प्रतप्तायसपिण्डवत्.
Hari Om. Tat brahma iti avadhārayet. So we're continuing the experience, the subjective experience of the realized state now that we're nearing the end of ātmabodha. So understand that Brahman. Today, these 2 verses have a particular theme of describing that supreme state in terms of the light of consciousness. So this theme of bhāsya is going to be throughout every single word, as we're going to see. So avadhārayet, firmly understand with no traces of doubt. If there is any inkling or contradictory thought or experience then we must continue reflecting and come to that thorough understanding. So it's an absolute state of understanding. And what are we understanding in today's verse? Yadbhāsā bhāsyate'rkādi. So by whose light is illumined the sun and others? Meaning that all other sources of light, such as the sun, moon, stars, lightning, and fire. So those are the classic 5 categorization of phenomenal light. These phenomenal sources of light have light only when it is illumined by the light of consciousness. So Gurudev asks, to the man who is unconscious, does the sun have any light? Which is really interesting because oftentimes, I think there was a dialogue in one of the Upanishads where the student was sitting on the floor and the student was asking the Guru, I am sitting on the floor, therefore the floor is supporting me. What is supporting the floor? So Guru says the earth. So then what is supporting the earth? Then we can say the atmosphere, pressure put together. Then what is the air supported by? The space. Space is supported by what? And finally, he says the mind. He takes a twist right there. And that's the same twist that we're seeing here. That the phenomenal light is illumined by the consciousness of the mind. But then we continue. Where does the consciousness of the mind come from? Then it is that supreme reality, which one aspect of this, or one angle in which we're trying to indicate that supreme reality is the word chit, in Sat Chit Ananda. So bhāsyairiattu natu bhāsyate. By the luminous orbs, indeed, it does not is illuminated. See, what's really funny is because we see the word bhāsya so many times, it's a nice Sanskritam exercise to go through, which connotation and which derivative each of the word bhāsya coming up in. So here we're saying that that light of consciousness is not illumined by these phenomenal sources of light. And Gurudev jokes around. He says, you can't like open up somebody's mouth and start shining a flashlight in there. What are you doing? Trying to see Atman in you. That's not possible. That lights are these phenomenal lights, including the mind that illumines the world outside, can only illumine the objective world. But the subjective consciousness in whose light all else is given validity, that cannot be sought out using this phenomenal light, which is both the sunlight that we see, moonlight and etc., and the mind and intellect and its shining consciousness on the objective world. And as a classic phrase, the flashlight cannot shine light on its own batteries. Once it's disconnected, it doesn't function on its own. So the BMI cannot realize or understand, feel, or think that reality. So this is a very subjective experience. Yena sarvamidaṃ bhāti. So by which all this shines. So again, that emphasis is made again that everything, every possible upadhi that the mind can encounter, all of it is enlivened by that supreme consciousness. I'll move on to the next verse because the same theme continues, but it gives a very good example near the end. So in the next verse for 62, this Atman svayamantarbahirvyāpya antaha bahihi, that this Atman by itself pervades both the inside and outside. And Gurudev emphasizes this concept of all pervasiveness when he brings back the example of the dream and the waker. Just as the dream is within the mind, pervades everything in the dream, so too the Atman, the self, pervades everything. And bahihi and antaha. So again, we're pointing out the two possibilities of the objects of the world outside and inside as well, which means the koshas within, up until the causal body. Bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat. So again, that bahihi, exactly what do we mean? That the entire universe, and jagat here specifically given the definition, that this entire world of change. Anything that has limitation is subject to manipulation, has a beginning, middle, and end, therefore, by definition, is change. So that includes the BMI, PFT, OET, all of them are illumined by this chit, the consciousness. Therefore, Brahma prakāśate. Brahman alone is the one that shines on all of them. So the best example to digest this concept of even the world outside is illumined by the phenomenal lights, but even those light is illumined by the mind and intellect. But even that mind and intellect is illumined by this chit aspect of Brahman. The analogy is given as vahniprataptāyasapiṇḍavat, meaning that like fire permeating the red hot iron ball.
Prataptāyasapiṇḍavat.
Prataptāyasapiṇḍavat. So the lump of iron characteristically is black in color and cold to the touch. Fire, on the other hand, is gold in color and hot to the touch and doesn't have a particular shape or form. And when the iron piece is put inside of the fire, Gurudev explains it that fire becomes the most hospitable host, so welcoming and so embracing that it itself enters into it and spreads thoroughly and completely in and through the entire iron piece, so much so that it even lends its own quality to that iron piece. The iron piece now starts to glow golden and red hot. So much so that you won't be able to tell the difference between a coal piece versus an iron piece. It becomes that golden, red hot radiant. You can't see what its original nature was. But as this is true, so long as that there is contact between the fire and that iron piece. But as soon as you take it out, that iron piece will quickly go back to its natural state. So this analogy is such that as Gurudev says, the iron, carbon, and phosphorus of the BMI comes in contact with the fire of reality, therefore shines a divine potentiality in all. It's a really nice phrase to find that parallel between this analogy. And so when we see the activity of the body physically, emotionally, intellectually, it's brilliant with all potentiality, and that by nature is because of the contact with reality. As soon as that consciousness aspect is removed, meaning we're analyzing the moment of death, that consciousness leaves and all that we're left with is just a vacant body that takes 6 people to lift, and all the elements have to go back into its original form. And so we see it return back to its natural jada state once that contact is removed. So this is a great analogy to think about. The enlivening nature comes from that chit aspect of Brahman, and it is when that contact is there that the jada aspects of all the upadhis look like they're acting. But it is only because of that source within that cannot be found out or understood by using the upadhis itself. It cannot turn around and shine light on its own source. So with that, that's all I have, Swamiji.
Hari Om. So this is the final shloka that we find with that refrain, tat brahmetyavadhārayet, where think of that which is the most exalted, that which is the most subtle, that which is the most pervasive, that which is the most luminous. Anything I can think of at that highest level, the superlative in my known field, this Brahman is even beyond that. That's the point given here, time and again, time and again. And the shloka is no different here, where it draws our attention with the example to ātmabodha, the sun, the moon, those others that are illuminated. These are the most exalted entities that have lumosity associated with them. And if we were to ask, is there like some light switch that turns on the sun, that turns on the moon? That's what we tell our kids sometimes. They explain sunrise, sunset, and moonrise and moonset. But the truth is they have nothing that sparks that light. By their very nature, they provide that light. Now, thinking of these entities then, even they only gain their illumination because of this substratum. That's the depth that it goes to there. Meaning there is nothing I can compare and say Brahman is like this, is finite in this sense. There's no way we can do that. Now, if we look at this point in the text, the beautiful thing we can do is going back to previous shlokas and seeing how this logic was built up over time. By this time, it sounds redundant in a sense that yes, what we've been told before is told again, but that's very intentional to reiterate this point so that by this point in the text, any lingering erroneous notions that are there have to be taken away. But I may be still at that stage in the very beginning of this text where the logic still isn't proven to me completely. I have to dwell over that. Or maybe it's that comprehending that there can be an entity that needs nothing else to illumine it. I can't wrap my head around that either. So in the very beginning, the fourth and fifth shlokas, it was given very clearly that this is an entity that reveals itself by itself, just like the sun. The sun was used an example there to show reveals itself by itself. But you see the built on that now? Here it's saying even those entities like the sun, they only gain their sentiency and their brightness from this Brahman. So examples are used like that, taking me to understand one point in one way, but I can't keep that example limited there. The sun used here, the example is slightly different, but takes me deeper in that understanding right there. Now, why is it so important, this idea of what is illumined, what is not illumined, by what? Again, bhāsyaihi na bhāsyate. So this Brahman is that which is not illumined by their light, meaning there is no mutual enlightening going on here, mutual illuminating. It's not that, yes, what I see as the most exalted upadhi, that also lends sentiency to that substratum, that makes no sense there. So that part's reiterated here. Or else if that were the case, that even the sun, what we see is that exalted entity, it illuminates that substratum, that would mean that there are two permanent substratums there then. And that can't be the case. That does not check out. So anything I perceive, as we saw in the previous shloka 2 weeks ago, anything I can perceive with my senses, that means it is impermanent. It has an end to it. This Brahman is subtler than that. Straight away, if I can perceive, it's not true then. Now the next shloka, what's the example that we see? A red hot iron ball and permeated by fire. Where if we look at any entity like an iron ball, it's cold to the touch. It just sits there, not like a pet. You can't make it roll over. There's a TV show recently where the kid he wants a dog. The parents don't want to get him a dog. They get him a pet rock. They sell those. It's called a pet rock. And he says, I can pet it, but it doesn't roll over. It doesn't do anything else like that. An iron ball does not do anything then. All right. And if it was sitting there, it would provide no fear, nothing. Now, when that iron ball is caught on fire and starts rolling down the street, imagine the fear that it incurs in people. It becomes a weapon at that point. The heat of it, the trajectory can cause damage, all of these things. Now, what is the reason why this jadavastu, this thing that has no movement associated with it, no luster associated with it, how does it become that fiery ball of mass? It's because of the sentiency given by that fire. Illuminating it, it changes the very purpose of it, the composition of it, everything seems to change. Similarly, that's the same thing with this assemblage here. If we go back to shloka number 25, what did we see there? That sat in chit aspect that's lent from this atma. that aspect of the self, when it's blended with that intellect, what arises? That notion of I know. And that is the most powerful notion that we have. Whether it's I know or I don't know, what's indicative there, what's the important part is not the vishesha jnana of what I know or I don't know, but that illumination factor, that I there, what is that I truly representing? That's where our rishis look to. Not to the petty portion of what is the thing that we know, but what is that very illuminating factor. Now, when that consciousness can inhabit and pervade through this jadavastu of my assemblage right here, and this hunk of mass of, we saw the grossification of all the elements and everything in the beginning, this hunk of just all these elements, for it to go from that state of jada all the way to being sentient enough to I know, how powerful is that substratum then that lends it that sentiency. And even then, it's simply a finite entity at that point still, because it has an end to it. And as Gurudev points out in his commentary, he uses the words matter and spirit here, is what he uses, the best English translation that we can provide to these words. But when that Chaitanya, when that consciousness pervades this assemblage right here and gives it that sentiency, the only way that Chaitanya can express is through this upadhi. That's the only way we can see its expression. Whether it's these sense organs gathering information, this intellect making decisions based on that, that's the only way. And it only is expressed that way. But the only way this assemblage has any kind of spark of life to it is wholly dependent on that substratum, on that atma. So in the first shloka, we see very clearly that there is, again, no dependency of this Brahman. Does not depend on any other thing to give it sentiency or illumination. At the same time, in the next shloka, we find the reiteration that for this assemblage to have any kind of movement associated with it, even that idea of I know, I don't know, this intellectualization is needed to understand what this philosophy is. That only comes because it's illumined by that consciousness. Now, one step further then. Bhuji Guruji put this very beautifully in one of his texts called Isha Stuti. Isha Stuti, we'd see it as we get to Bhakti Grantha. He's writing it about the beauty and glory of Bhagavan. Far from it, though. We look in there, one of the things he points out is, Apurva Paksha comes up that there is no Ishvara, none of this exists. How does he answer that objection? He says the very fact that you're able to say he doesn't exist, that you can even intellectualize that in your own mind, that means he does exist then. That means that Swarupa is there, because if it weren't there, even that ability to determine what is there, what is not there, that whole process would not be possible then. Such a deep Siddhanta that he's brought in a very beautiful way there in that Isha Stuti. So Swamiji, that's what I have on these two shlokas.
Thank you both. Here in these two shlokas, the concept continues. It is the same concept. What is being asserted in this particular two shlokas is the Swarupa of Brahman, and the Brahma Lakshana here is Brahman is Swayam Prakash Swarupa. That Brahman is self-illumining, does not depend on anything, anyone, or anywhere else. Advaita-Vastu is self-illumining. Nothing else needs to be illumining this Brahma Tattva. Therefore, one on the outset to understand is Brahman is not a feeling that, when you close your eyes and you feel, ये कुछ कुछ होता है, कुछ कुछ जाता भी है. Whatever comes as kuch kuch goes as kuch kuch. Cannot be a feeling. Is not a conceptual experience. That which I can conceptually decipher. This is not something which the intellect has the capacity to illumine. In fact, it is the other way around. That because of whose presence the intellect can have the capacity to illumine. The mind has the capacity to ascertain, not the other way around. But alas, aneka janma samprapta, our samskaras are constantly, it has to be validated. Our experience has a sense of meaning to it only if it is validated by our either indriyas or the mana or the buddhi. If it cannot validate, then I see it as speculative, or even to a point that it must be a hallucination, that there is no reality to it. Like, I had a very beautiful session on Sunday, second session especially, where the questions were, okay, I realize, and suppose I realize, and I reach to this self-illumining state. So what? What next? Now this attitude or this idea is vehement because my buddhi is still trying to validate it as a concept. That day when logically I arrive at the point that this is how far the buddhi can, and from here on it is the buddhi merging into that clarity, that which it has gained, that all of this is happening because of the conductive effect of that jivatma bhava, that individuality. Thereby this buddhi has this ability to feel that it is conscious, but the source, which is the true nature, I am not this buddhi, I am not that which the buddhi is holding on to, that which is illumining this buddhi is my true nature. That Brahman is being talked about here. And in both I think Kathopanishad and Mundakopanishad, there is this mantra from drawing which we use it in our daily puja vidhi also. Natatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhāsā sarvamidaṃ vibhāti. Bhagavad Gita also has a similar thought. न तद्भासयते सूर्यः न शशांको न पावकः. So the same thought is being reasserted in Bhagavad Gita as well, and that same thought is being brought in here in ātmabodha as well. So what is being said here? That we know these different padarthas that which illumine our life. That's why whenever I say sun, I call him the unfailing brightness of our life. He is the first, Surya Narayana is the first in the creation and stays long till the end of the creation. Relatively longer. A powerful source of light. A reflected source of it is the moon. We say that the stars are, shining, but there is this, scientists and their reluctance to give up and their pursuit. they find sometimes an irony that which we see as today shining, by the time the light reaches us, that star may have become an extinct. It's coming from that many billions of years away. The distance is that vast, but still that is also a shine. Then we have Vidyuta. Vidyuta, the lightning. Or tongue in cheek, I will extend it to the electricity which illumines all of this. Or the Agni. So these are the source of light. Now, even for these source of light, the Upanishad says, Jyotisham api tad jyotihi. That which illumines all these illumining bodies is this Atma Chaitanya. Even the Surya, Chandra, Nakshatra, Vidyuta or the Agni is illumined by this eye of conscious principle. I, the conscious principle, has to illuminate for it to be even cognized as existing. Many times following this logic, we fall prey. Even if I close the eyes, it still is there, right? From whose standpoint? Not from your standpoint. While discussing this, we cannot suddenly switch the standpoint to some third person's perspective, from whose perspective it might exist or not exist. That is their experience, not our experience. When it is being talked about as my experience, I cannot suddenly shift the standpoint. The point of reference has to be very clean. We cannot arbitrarily change the point of reference and say, उस standpoint से, पर उस standpoint का discussion नहीं कर रहे हम. That has to be very clearly understood. Otherwise, we get lost in that particular lame logic. So, yena sarvamidaṃ bhāti. That which illumines everything is this conscious principle. There was another beautiful thought when we were going through the Karana Sharira as the Sushupti Avastha. There is it. Even the Sushupti Avastha where the Indriyas, Mana, Buddhi have been withdrawn, that blank experience where I know nothing, because for knowing Buddhi is required. I know nothing is also an experience which is illumined by this conscious principle alone. So there cannot be any Shunyavada. Shunyavada saying that it is nihilism where it is nothingness. And you have to reach to that nothingness. Then I say, Tamil, when they eat curd rice and the children can't pronounce it properly, they call it Tachimamu. For those who are going for that experience of nothingness, it is like the childish mindset. Eat that curd rice, you will get nice sleep, and in there you experience that. You don't need to put effort in this sadhana at all. And having reached that nothingness, it is kind of a recurring one. Whereas here, that which we are talking about is knowing, being, ascertaining, and abiding in it. There is no losing in it. Therefore, in the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan says very clearly that yadgatva nanivartante tadhama paramam mama. Having attained which, there is nothing more to attain and nothing more to lose. It is once and for all. It is not like a temporary experience that I may have forgotten, and now that I remember, maybe tomorrow I'll forget. So Adi Śaṅkarācarya ji, in the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita Bhashya, he says it very clearly that it is not a remembrance. It is not a process of remembrance or recognition wherein I am trying to ascertain it by recognizing it. It is a process of self-awareness. I am not aware of the self, and now that I am aware of the self, knowing that it is a process which cannot be undone. Yadgatva nanivartante tadbhāma paramam mama. Now, having said that, he further moves into the next shloka where he says, let me get to a copy which I can read. Svayamantarbahirvyāpya bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat. Now we have seen these concepts as simple shlokas as we introduced to our Balavihar kids, where we say akhanda mandalakaram vyaptam yena characharam. So right in that shloka, it is talking about that which is pervading in and out. Swayam antarbahihi vyapya. The moment I hear antarbahihi, there's only one mantra that runs my head, which is from the Narayana Sukta, where it says, Antarbahishya tat sarvam vyapya narayana sthitaha. Antarbahihi, that Chaitanya Atma Swarupa alone is pervading. Bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat. Now the reason he is bringing this bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat, he is going to connect that jagat and take the understanding of a standpoint of Brahma with how do they see the jagat. So he expands that thought in the next shloka, which we will see next week. But here he brings that concept wherein he says, bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat. Everything that which can be experienced is illumined only by this Atma Chaitanya alone. Now, this is a very powerful tool to meditate upon. Many, we seek the validation by peers, validation by elders, validation by somebody that you love and care, and constantly that seeking, that is quite unsettling. It makes us walk on eggshells. It makes us be very vulnerable, and that vulnerable sets off a lot of things which we lose control upon. So this particular shloka to be meditated upon, nididhyasitavyam, where that vulnerability is being tackled. How so? Anything that which is being experienced, anything that which is in the jagat, and where does the jagat begin from? Idam shariram kaunteya kshetramityabhidhiyate. So everything starting from this sharira mana buddhi, this conglomerate, to the expanse of this universe, of this jagat, everything is illumined by this conscious principle, that which is my swarupa. Meaning, the very existence of everything is validated by this conscious principle, which is my nature. Not being in that standpoint, constantly being at the realm of the intellect, which does not have confidence in being. The flimsy patterns of emotion, flimsy patterns of the body, which is constantly changing. That identity constantly is fluctuating, doesn't give us a scope to have firm feet grounded. So vulnerability continues. and the fluctuation continues. And when that fluctuation continues, that instability is quite a restless state. Now, all of these layers function only when that Atma Chaitanya is enlivening. And that is me. I am the one who is validating them. I don't need to seek the validation of all these layers or the interaction of these layers or that with which I am interacting with to validate my very presence, because all of these factors are possible only when they are illumined by this conscious principle. bhāsayannakhilaṃ jagat. Brahma prakāśate vahniprataptāyasapiṇḍavat. This example should be very familiar because we have already dealt with 2 shlokas on this very concept in the very early stages of this ātmabodha. Ayasa, that is why the magnet is called ayaskanta, that which attracts, that piece of metal, piece of iron which attracts, ayaskanta. So ayasa, the iron, a ball of iron thrown into the fire, just by the samsarga, just by the presence in that fire, after a long time of high temperatures, you see that it turns into a mass of red ball. People do all sorts of experiment, take that red ball, put it on ice to check how fast does it go, sink into the ice, or through different materials, how does it react. It is not its svabhava, it is not its swarupa. But how does that fire spread through that entire mass of iron? It becomes one with it. The iron starts glowing red. That is how all the layers of the jagat are, including this body, mind and intellect. They are just pieces of jada vastu. All the brilliance that comes in, the beauty that comes in, the grandeur that comes in these different layers of equipment is by the presence of that Paramatma Chaitanya. Therefore, Bhagavan says in the earlier chapters of 7th and 9th chapter, he says, Buddhir buddhimatam asmi. I am that buddhi which is shining forth when you see in a brilliant mind. All the grandeur that you see in this, that is because of this Paramatma Chaitanya which is illumining and sustaining it as the substratum. And that which is the substratum alone is my true nature. So he says, Brahma prakāśate. How is this Brahman illumining? Just like the ayasa, the piece of jada vastu, when in the intimate relationship with the fire, starts glowing with the qualities of the fire. Similarly, this buddhi acquires this, and the manas acquires from the buddhi, the indriyas acquire it from the manas, and thus we claim that I am the one who is. And where do we fall? The moment this whole process, as it is happening from that Paramatma Chaitanya to the reflected consciousness, to the buddhi, to the mana, to the indriyas, to the outside world, as soon as this whole process sets in, there is this ahankara that raises up its dirty hood. A very powerful, very rigid fellow, this ahankara. Whose ahankara are we talking about? I about myself. You should meditate about that about the self from the standpoint of self. This ahankara is a very rigid fellow. Reacts, restless, and never has the stability. And as much as it restlessly wobbles, that much agitated we become. So what is one best method to work on? To find method and means to uproot our own ego. And in this jnana abhyasa, what are we trying to do? Its very astitva, its very existential factor is being questioned. If we are really sincerely working on this sadhana, our ahankara must be sitting in a corner scaring, aaj gaye to kal gaye. Provided we take this shravana into manana and get to the stage of nididhyasana. That the focal point should be at the standpoint of I, the conscious principle, validates anything as an experience. The buddhi can cognize, the mana can feel, the organs of perception action can function only when there is that conscious principle. The moment we give any more value to any one of these layers other than that conscious principle, we get dragged mercilessly into that which the Shastra calls as samsara. Samyak sarati. Samyak sarati, that which constantly moves. That is said in a very benevolent way, but our experience is it is not just moving like a pleasant jhumati chali hawa. No, it's not like that. It is like a tufan that just drags us. Why? Because of our shift of focus and wrong identity. That has to be identified at every step, being a seeker. That when I go through the motions of the day, how alert am I being that conscious witness, watching all these movements, knowing at every step that this is happening because of that Paramatma Chaitanya, and everything has to be surrendered. Yadyat karma karomi tattadakhilam. How does it become Aradhana of that Shambhu, of that Mahadeva, of that Paramatma? When we see it from the standpoint of that conscious principle. See, doing puja, upasana, sitting on the altar, sitting at the altar is a good discipline. But when is the extension? So in the Upadesha Sara, Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi says, Ashtamurti Bhrit Deva Pujanam, that you expand it, that all that which you are seeing, you see it as the glow of that Atma Chaitanya from the standpoint of this conscious witnesshood. Now, where is it slipping? Where is my ahankara slipping? Where is it identifying? Why is it becoming adamantly identified with those layers? And all this happens only because I fail to be consciously alert, vigilant. As the Ghat sections in India, they have amazing, captivating words. One of them is Nazar hati, Durghatana ghati. When do accidents happen? Accidents meaning when do we get dragged into this tsunami of samsara? Whenever our focus is weak, whenever our alertness is weak. There's only one, there's either alertness or not. Weak meaning absence of alertness. That we become and behave as though we are this ego, and then it takes us on a trip. The actual trip is when we disidentify from it and establish ourselves as this conscious witness from where every tamasha can be watched. But we become one with that ego which has to be observed, then it takes us for a ride. So, as a marker in the whole day, as a sadhana, how observant am I of my own nitya kriya? All activities that I am doing, how consciously am I observing it while functioning? The moment I slip away from it, that is when there will be a wrong identification, and through that wrong identification, all kinds of calamities happen. Who is the end payer for all of these calamities? I, with my own restlessness, which leads into several kinds of tapa. There is jealousy, there is comparison, there is competition, there is feeling pathetic, feeling low, feeling high, feeling superior, feeling inferior. All of these different kinds of vikritis. So let us learn through these shlokas to practically see how we can be alert, vigilant, and in that self-awarefulness alone, there is the uprooting of this layer of wrong identification called ego. Now, if this is understood, then we will step into the next shloka, which talks about then what is then from that standpoint, how does one view the jagat? So that we'll see next week. We'll wind up right now. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanta Shanta Shantihi. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Take care, everyone. Hope we'll see next week in the next satsang. Until then, be safe.